Hi, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm excited to share with you all a ghost story today that dovetails perfectly with last week's episode. And it seemed like the timing was just perfect in terms of when this listener reached out to me. I had just finished recording Leslie's episode about her book, Surviving Death. If you haven't listened, she really digs deep into understanding and learning and researching a lot of the phenomena that we talk about on this show. And this listener reached out specifically about apparitions, which is so interesting because it's rare that I get someone who reaches out about that. So here today is Judita's story. I am a nurse, and I have worked at my hospital for 16 years. My colleagues and I always talk about spirits, and our patients often tell us about people that are not there. We typically would just dismiss it, but it would freak us out a bit too. A few years back, I had a patient who was A&O times 4, alert and oriented to person, place, time, and situation, that asked me about a boy in the room. Without giving any information and staying pretty cool, I asked him, "What's the boy's name?" He said Nathan. I told the patient that I didn't want to freak him out, but there was no boy in the room with us. It was just the two of us. He said, "I know, but I see a boy, and his name is Nathan." Then he continued to tell me about his own NDE that he had had and how it had opened him up to being a medium. Over the years, patients on all floors around the hospital would tell us about a young kid playing. We now knew his name, thanks to my patient who had had the NDE. Every time something happens, we call on Nathan to help guide us. A few months ago, one of our patients was being interviewed for the local news at the hospital, and we wanted to know what he was saying. It was at the beginning of the COVID pandemic when no one was allowed in the hospital but the patient. One of our patients shared with the local news team, "All of my nurses were so nice, and on the last night they had this sweet little boy come and tell me I will be okay." We all know there are no kids allowed in hospitals right now. Often our patients see this little boy, and that week alone, no less than 3 patients, all around the same time, commented on how they saw this little boy. That same night, my patient, different from the one who had been released and was talking to the news crew, was FaceTiming with his children and grandchildren. He looked to the hallway and asked me, "How come this little boy is here? I thought there were no kids allowed to visit." I told him that he was correct and that the boy he sees is Nathan, and we love our Nathan, but that he needed to go now and visit other people. I really didn't want my patient dying that night, especially after meeting his family. Nathan is always around, and some of our nurses have seen him themselves. Even one nurse, who's a practicing Buddhist, was pregnant with her firstborn at the time she saw him. She got so nervous she started leaving candy around so he would leave her alone. So that is the story about our Nathan and how he helps guide our work at the hospital when we need it most. So if you have a story to share with me, please send me an email or DM me on Instagram. You can email me at dramyrobbins@gmail. Tell me your story and I will do my best to tell it on the show. Thanks so much. Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Wondering what comes next and what it all means? Head over to Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere you get your podcasts and hit subscribe. Also, if you could take a minute to rate and review my podcast, I would really appreciate it. Stay tuned as we continue to explore life, death, and the space between.